How can X help Donald Trump get back into the White House? The former president and Republican nominee returns to the platform in a talk with Elon Musk. As he faces real challenges from Kamala Harris, will it boost his chances? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. As recently as 2 years ago, Donald Trump and Elon Musk were public enemies, with Musk posting on his social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, "I don't hate the man, but it's time for Trump to hang up his hat and sail into the sunset." Now the billionaire businessman has endorsed him, and the Republican presidential candidate has returned to X. Their 2-hour-long interview was streamed live and touched topics including immigration, foreign policy and US energy policy. Trump is under pressure to halt the advance of the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris in the race for the White House, and Musk is facing business problems. So what impact could X have on the US election? We'll discuss all of this in just a moment with our guests. But first, this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Donald Trump said it would be the interview of the century, but it started badly.
All right. Hello, everyone. My apologies for the late start. We unfortunately had a massive distributed denial of service attack.
And after 2 hours of conversation between the Republican presidential candidate and ex-owner Elon Musk, many listeners may have concluded it didn't live up to the hype. The two men who didn't appear in Vision covered issues including immigration, China, and Trump's Democratic rival, Kamala Harris.
They're rewriting history and making Kamala sound like a moderate when in fact she is far left, like far left.
Worse than Bernie Sanders. She is considered more liberal by far than Bernie Sanders. She's a radical left lunatic.
Harris and her running mate Tim Walz have been credited with re-energizing the Democratic Party's campaign since President Biden announced he wasn't standing for re-election. Recent polling shows Harris is leading Trump in key battleground states in the Midwest. And Musk is facing his own business challenges. X has lost millions of users and advertisers since the billionaire tech entrepreneur bought the platform 2 years ago.
Both of these men are looking to try to rebrand and reinvent themselves in very different ways. I think Elon Musk is trying to show that the X social media platform is still a platform that is one that actually should be seen as courted and involved by major corporations and individuals. And also Donald Trump, who now appears to be losing much of his lead in the poll to Kamala Harris, is looking to amplify his voice.
Trump was banned from Twitter in 2021 after his supporters stormed the US Capitol. Since then, he's mostly used his social media platform, Truth Social. After years of trying to lure Trump back to X, Musk has finally succeeded. But some critics say the interview may not have helped either of them as much as they'd hoped. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's discuss all of this further now with our panel of guests today. In New York, Brian Stelter is a veteran media journalist and special correspondent for Vanity Fair. Steve Herman, the Voice of America's chief national correspondent and author of Behind the White House Curtain, is in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And in Burlington, Vermont, Arshad Hasan is a Democratic political strategist and founder of Convey Communications. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. We're doing this programme today, I think, to look at the light it sheds, this interview, on two very powerful people, their relationship and the big challenges they currently face. But let's first look at the interview itself and the content of the interview. Brian, you're a very experienced print and broadcast reporter. Do you agree with me there wasn't much news in it? And frankly, some of it was a bit dull.
Yes, a 2-hour-long conversation between two men who really like each other but don't have a lot in common. This reminded me of a typical conversation between a billionaire donor and a candidate, because Musk was trying to push Trump towards certain policy directions, trying to give Trump advice for how to win the presidency again. Trump was indulging Musk the way that politicians often indulge donors, but there was very little news. The biggest headline is that this happened at all. that Musk is using his powerful social media platform to support Donald Trump and help get Trump reelected. Whether that'll work or not, we'll find out in a few months. But it's notable that Musk is putting his weight behind this disgraced, twice impeached, indicted former president.
Steve, you're there in one of the swing states. You've been listening to the whole thing and you are covering this campaign very, very closely. Were there any nuggets in there? Did we learn anything new?
No, I don't think so. I would agree with Brian and his assessment of this. And also, what Donald Trump needs to do, or Kamala Harris for that case, is to really resonate with the voters that are here. Right behind me is Northampton County, Pennsylvania, which has always predicted the outcome of every presidential election since 2008, the swing county USA. And there's probably no resonance coming out of that 2-hour interview on X that's going to swing any voters in this swing county.
Arshad, let's talk about the tone of it. Does it even qualify as an interview? It certainly wasn't a rigorous interview. It seems to be a softball conversation where Trump was allowed to say whatever he wanted.
I wouldn't call it an interview at all. It implies some sort of journalistic norms. Instead, really what we saw is one billionaire fawning over another, going completely unchallenged. You heard some of the same claims and boasts and lies as you've regularly heard from Donald Trump. So nothing new there. What Trump really needed to do was reverse the momentum that we see on the other side, on our side, with Harris and Walz. Instead, we just saw more of the same in the friendliest possible format, which itself didn't seem to do Trump any favors.
Steve, let's talk about the political backdrop to all of this and where we are in this campaign, because the last month has been, for an outside observer like me, pretty incredible. Can you bring us up to speed of where we were, just a matter of weeks ago? And I think several important things that changed: a debate, an assassination attempt, and then a candidate pulling out.
Exactly. It is a very, very different race than it was a few weeks ago. And the polls are starting to reflect that, because we're seeing a surge here in Pennsylvania and in these other critical swing states, although we could argue Pennsylvania is arguably the most critical swing state. And there's been this momentum for the Democrats with Kamala Harris and now with Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota joining the ticket. They're getting the publicity, they're getting the momentum. And slowly, the Democrats have come from behind, have caught up to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and now in certain swing states are starting in some of the polls to go above that margin of error. It essentially, if you gather all the data right now, this is a tied race. It doesn't matter really what's going to happen in California or Texas. It matters in a half a dozen states. And those are the numbers to watch. The polling that's going to take place here in Pennsylvania and a few other states. And you can expect that these candidates will be spending a lot of time here, because if you look at the odds, if you don't win Pennsylvania, your chances of winning the electoral votes needed to get elected, not the popular vote, the electoral vote, without Pennsylvania, the odds are very small that you can do that.
And Steve, you've been covering US politics for a long time. Normally, the candidates get a boost from their convention, and the Democrats haven't even had their convention yet. Do you think it's likely there'll be a further boost for Harris?
Yeah, probably, because of all the publicity, the relatively positive publicity that they'll get in the mainstream media. But is that a 1%, 2%, 3% boost? We don't know yet. But even 1% at this stage is very, very valuable for these candidates. And to lose 1%, especially in the swing states, is also something very alarming for if it happens to either Harris or Trump. But there's still a time to go. Pennsylvania is one of the earliest for early voting, which will start in October. So it's a 2 or 3 more months still. And whether the Harris campaign is able to maintain that momentum, or is Donald Trump going to see a resurgence? He's going to come back. And I believe in October, he said he's going to do a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania is where the assassination attempt occurred. And presumably all the attention on that will paint Donald Trump as a more sympathetic figure and perhaps give him a little bit of boost as well.
Brian, so it's clear things have changed, maybe not completely significantly yet, but it's clear, I think, from all the polls that Harris is slightly ahead. It seems that Trump hasn't really caught up with this. In that conversation on X, he still wanted to talk a fair bit about Joe Biden. He'd honed his attacks on Joe Biden. He was Sleepy Joe.
Right.
He doesn't seem to have framed the attack on Kamala Harris, does he?
I think that's absolutely right. Trump has had 3.5 years to think about his attacks against President Biden. He seems rattled by all the sudden changes this summer. And I can understand why. You know, think about this from Trump's point of view. He almost died in an assassination attempt. He now has to go back out into public and hold big events, having been shot at on stage. That's one big reason to be rattled. Second, his opponent suddenly changed. Instead of a fellow old white guy, he's up against a historic figure, a woman of color, in a country that has a long history of racism and has never elected a woman of color. So all of a sudden, the dynamic has changed. And number three, she's getting bigger crowds than he is. You know, you look at the pictures on screen, that's what Trump is known for. Big crowds, big rallies. And all of a sudden, Harris and Walz are pulling in even larger numbers than he has been able to do. So he has 3 real reasons to be shaken up right now. And I think on a psychological level, that is impacting him. And you could hear it in the Musk interview when he was more comfortable talking about Biden than he is about Harris.
And of course, the previous dynamic, Arshad, was Joe Biden was the old man. Now, of course, Donald Trump is the old man in the race. I noticed some people on Twitter, or X, as he says we must call it, people were commenting on his voice, and it sounded slightly lispy. I don't know whether that was about the technical quality of X. But tell us, as a Democratic strategist, do you think the Harris campaign are going to target him for his age, or are they going to stay away from that because of the way they were treated when Biden was the candidate?
Honestly, I don't believe that they need to. In this case, Trump is about to reap what he has sown. He has talked so much about the mental acuity, about the age, about the mental fitness of his previous opponent, Joe Biden, that it is only going to come back to him. This is a monster of his own creation. I don't think that the Harris-Walz campaign will need to do anything like that. We've already seen people questioning, and it was not just lisping, it was also slurring. We've already seen that. Moreover, you can see a contrast between the two campaigns and the candidates behind them, as your guests have been talking about. In the last couple of weeks, the Harris campaign has vetted, chosen, rolled out their VP candidate, successfully, I should say, and has done 7 campaign swing states tours through the 7 campaign swing states. Trump has only shown up in Montana so far. He's done a couple interviews, and as we've just been talking about, those interviews have been disastrous, and if anything, just painting a greater contrast between the two visions and the character of the two different candidates. Before, I'm a delegate, so as a delegate for Biden, and now I'm a delegate for Harris. I can tell you that the difference amongst Democrats, it's night and day. It's honestly, it's indescribable. The last 3 weeks have been an absolute whirlwind. I can't wait for the convention. I'm actually looking forward to in a way I haven't in a long time. So when you compare the energy of the two campaigns, the two candidates, and the base for both of the parties, you're seeing a humongous shift like we've not seen historically.
Brian, we mentioned the crowd sizes. The crowd sizes, of course, the money. Kamala Harris is getting more money than Trump. But on the crowd sizes, that is something from the inauguration onwards. Trump has been obsessed about crowd sizes. He goes on about it all the time. Yeah. What do you make of the fact that he's now making this, and given the reporters go to these rallies, rather ridiculous allegation that they're actually not real, they're AI?
Right. I'm out with a new column about this for The Atlantic. I wrote about how Trump always talks about crowd size and tells people not to believe their eyes and ears when he's at his most vulnerable, when he feels his most insecure. Sometimes that's with his inauguration, when Obama's was bigger. Sometimes when there are protests that are really big against him, he minimizes the crowd to make it sound like no big deal. And during his hush money trial, when his supporters did not flood Lower Manhattan the way he wanted to, he lied and said that police were stopping his supporters from coming to the courthouse. And that wasn't true. I was there. It was easy to get to the courthouse. But he has a history of lying about crowd size when he feels vulnerable, when he feels insecure. And that is what we're seeing now. I know sometimes in politics, it is popular to say, ignore the feelings, ignore the energy, ignore the popularity contest. It's about policy, right? Policy is what matters. And that's what you're hearing from Trump and his allies right now. Focus on policy. Trump is winning on the border, for example, on immigration. That's what they say. But the reality is that energy and momentum and excitement does matter a lot. So this crowd size measurement, although it's not scientific, it is important because, as the other guests are saying, this race has totally changed in terms of the emotional appeals that are happening. And that is why I think Trump's age does matter. Harris might not point it out herself. She doesn't have to. But when you hear Trump maybe slurring his words, it was kind of hard to tell last night on this X interview. When you hear him maybe having a hard time communicating, it does speak to his age. Now, of course, his supporters would say he did a 2-hour-long chat. Harris isn't doing that. She's not doing interviews. And that's a fair critique. Harris should be doing interviews. She should be engaging with the press. And I think she probably will after the convention because she wants to have a flawless rollout. But bottom line, the energy levels do matter in this race a lot.
Well, Brian, that point you made, a lot of conversation last night was rambling. The fact checkers were kept busy, but there was that one point that you just made that Trump made that may be a genuine one, I think.
It's pretty sad when you think that somebody that does this for a living can't answer a question or is afraid to do an interview. And in her case, with a very friendly interview, she's got all friendly interviewers. It's pretty sad.
Yes, absolutely.
Steve, you compare what Trump's done, the National Association of Black Journalists conference, the news conference at Mar-a-Lago, this X, whatever we call it, interview conversation. Do you think it's going to start becoming a thing that she's not giving interviews soon? Do you think it's going to become an issue for her?
Oh, it's already an issue. And as we pointed out here, that's what the Republicans and Donald Trump are hammering Kamala Harris on right now. She did say last week, I believe that starting this week or by the end of this month, that she's going to give some interviews. There's going to have to be a more general press conference. She's probably going to have to do the sort of podcasts and the social media interviews with the influencers that are very, very important to the Democratic Party base. Because as much as anything else, this is about rallying your base. And that's why maybe the Elon Musk and Donald Trump conversation doesn't get Donald Trump any more voters. But what he needs to do, and what we're hearing from Republican strategists, is he needs to ensure that the base gets out on Election Day or with the mail voting, which he's been against. And that's something that the Republican strategists fret about. But the big difference is right now, 2 months ago, it was the Democratic strategists and the Democratic Party lawmakers in Congress that had gone from bedwetting, as it was said, to concern to panic. And what we're starting to hear in the past couple of days from Republican strategists, and even I heard an interview this morning with Vivek Ramaswamy, one of Donald Trump's primary opponents and now one of his supporters, saying that this campaign, the Trump campaign, really needs to do a reset. And what was pointed out here, not focus on Joe Biden anymore and figure out how to effectively go after Kamala Harris.
Arshad, on the issue of Kamala Harris doing interviews, do you agree she should have done one by now?
No. Sorry.
Of course, I knew you'd say that.
Look at the last 2 or maybe almost 3 weeks now. She's been a little busy. As I mentioned, she had to pick a vice presidential candidate and roll them out. That's a process that usually takes months. She's done 7 stops on a campaign tour in 5 days. When is she going to have time for a sit-down interview? She also has to raise money.
Sorry, the president, Arshad, the president of the United States is pretty busy. He has to make time for press scrutiny as well, and even if it's a female president.
There are certainly weeks that go by without a one-on-one interview that the president has. Biden certainly has gone more than a couple of weeks without a sit-down interview. Listen, I think it will happen. I think she's going to sit down and do an interview. But she has, in just almost 3 weeks, she has closed a national 5-point gap and has actually started leading in some of the swing states. Whatever she is doing is working. If I'm giving her advice, it's to say, keep doing what you're doing. I think after the convention, with another boost, she'll have a little bit of time to sit down and breathe. And that's exactly what I think she's going to do. Nonetheless, you can see the success, the rather rapid success of her campaign through, honestly, very difficult conditions. She's only had a couple weeks to ramp everything up. If she didn't sit down and do an interview with CNN, it's pretty understandable. She's had a couple weeks. She's done more in these last couple weeks than Donald Trump has. Donald Trump has done one rally, one campaign stop. It was in Montana. And he's done a couple sit-down interviews. Only one of them was challenging. The others, a press conference in his home, a interview with Elon Musk where he had somebody fawning over him, and a Fox News interview. These are not rigorous journalistic standards. He does need to rally his base, but I wouldn't call those some kind of like Barbara Walters or Edward R. Murrow moment for the press. I think if we wait till after the convention, we'll get an interview, and I think we'll get one that is actually substantive.
OK, Brian, let's talk about the other side of this conversation, the Elon Musk side of the conversation.
Right.
X said that it got 1.3 million viewers. I went and looked up how many viewers Joe Biden's interview with ABC News after he pulled out got. That got 8 million viewers, so quite a lot more for what Elon Musk calls legacy media. Also, this didn't start on time. It was 40 minutes late. There were all sorts of technical problems. A repeat of, remember, when Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, was running for president last year. There was technical problems there. All rather embarrassing for Elon, isn't it?
And Musk is shopping some other numbers, trying to claim it was a lot bigger than a traditional TV interview. But the problem, of course, is that television ratings and internet streams are like apples and bananas. They're completely different. They can't be compared. I think the reality here is that Musk was basically doing the same thing Fox News does, giving Trump an audience of Trump supporters, maybe a couple of million, in order to repeat his favorite lines, sing his favorite songs. And to that end, it might have been effective for Trump to excite his base. But to your point, for Musk, this was a mess. It was embarrassing that the platform didn't work the way he wants it to work. Musk is a really interesting figure in this election because he says he's a moderate. He says he has voted for Democrats in the past, but he says Kamala Harris is a disaster and he wants Trump to win now. I think what it shows is that the dividing line in American politics today is not necessarily Democrats versus Republicans. It's people who are pretty casual and calm and normal versus extremists. And there are extremists on the right and left. People who have gone down internet rabbit holes, who believe wild conspiracy theories. That's happening on the left, but it's really, really dramatic right now on the right. Elon Musk, for example, promotes all sorts of conspiracy theories. He has said recently that civil war is inevitable. Well, I'm here, and I'm here to tell you it's not. America actually is a very stable country. Most Americans have a lot more in common than they have that divides us. You know, most people just want to get along with their neighbors. They don't want to be fighting all the time. But on Musk's platform, it's a constant fight. Everyone's constantly battling. And so I think that's the dividing line here. Harris and Walz are speaking to normal voters who want to bring the temperature down. But when you look at what Musk and Trump are doing, they're trying to raise the temperature. They're trying to make things hotter. They're trying to cause more conflict. And I think in some ways you might view this election as a tug of war between people who are trying to bring things down, keep them cooler, versus people who are trying to get riled up and make it hotter.
And Steve, it's not just people on the platform he runs, it's himself who's been involved in lies and disinformation and these sorts of comments. We have the European Union, their digital commissioner, wrote to Musk, reminding him of the EU's rules on hate speech. Already, the EU has charged X with failing to respect its social media laws. It's facing multi-million euro fines, possibly. Also, the UK is looking very critically at him. As Brian said, he talked about civil war in the US. He also said civil war is inevitable in the UK as well. In these countries, he might face legal action against him and his company. Do you think he's worried?
You have to ask what was his motivation in the first place for buying Twitter. And I need to preface what I'm saying by noting that I was among the group of journalists that for a period of time was permanently suspended from Twitter after Elon Musk bought it.
I thought there was free speech.
Really
I thought there was free speech, Steve. Why did he try and suspend you?
Well,
what did you do wrong? What could you have possibly done wrong?
Well, he was claiming that because we were tweeting about an account called Elon Jet that was tracking his whereabouts, that we were putting out assassination coordinates. And so he claimed it wasn't a free speech issue. But really what we've seen, I think Twitter, or X as it's called now, is still important, but it's much, much less relevant than it was before he bought it. I spend very little time on Twitter compared to before. I'm on Threads, Mastodon, other platforms, and I think a lot of journalists and definitely people that are centrist and left of center in the United States, at least, and in the UK recently, in Europe, have migrated off the platform. And maybe there's nothing that ever replaces it. So, as was noted, that's where Joe Biden made his announcement that he wasn't going to pursue another term anymore. So it still has relevance. News is made there. But as was pointed out here, there probably was not any news made last night. This was some sort of a conversation between a very, very influential and well-heeled donor and a candidate for president of the United States.
Arshad, after that conversation between Trump and Musk, Musk has invited Kamala Harris to take part in a similar conversation. After what you saw here, and knowing Musk has already endorsed Trump, what would be your advice to your candidate? Should she take him up on that offer?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? If she does, I'll trust her to do it well. However, here's the thing. Just on the technical basis alone, she should avoid this. So should have Trump, actually. But here's the thing. As we've all been mentioning, Twitter is not the space that it used to be. I've also almost entirely left Twitter. I'm on Threads. You can find me there. The problem with Twitter now, once Musk had taken it over, he became so hostile to left-leaning voices and started accusing pretty much everyone of being left-leaning and banning them. Free speech for me, but not for thee. It created such a toxic atmosphere that most of the political left, as we've already mentioned, is gone. So who is Kamala Harris reaching out to?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Arshad. Thank you to all our guests today, Brian Stelter, Steve Herman and Arshad Hasan. Coverage of the US campaign continues on Al Jazeera all the way to Election Day, November the 5th, with detailed analysis at aljazeera.com. As ever, for your comments, contributions and even complaints, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And on the platform we've been talking about today, or X, we're at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the team here, stay safe. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.